So I'd like you to meet Slater Victoroff. Slater is the CEO and co-founder of Indico, a startup that develops machine learning software that teaches computers to perform tasks which we used to think only people could do. For example, Netflix suggesting that you watch Homeland if you liked the series 24. Slater, thank you for joining us.
Happy to do it.
Maybe you could begin by just telling us a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. So I grew up in LA. I did sort of the standard, elementary, middle, high school progression. And at the end of high school, I was shocked to learn that the one school that I really wanted to go to hadn't accepted me. And that was a tough thing to deal with. So I took a gap year. Additionally, basically, the school that I'd gotten into, if you made it onto the wait list, you were guaranteed admission if you waited a year. So I decided that was the path that I was going down. And so during that year, I spent 3 months in Nepal, 2 months in China studying martial arts, and a long time doing sort of biomedical research. At the end of that, I went to Olin, which was the school that I had absolutely set my hearts and dreams on. And
why is that?
Because for most of my life, I believed that I could either go to class or I could learn, and Olin was the first place to convince me that I could do both at the same time. And then 3 years later, after incredible teaching and an excellent 3 years, I decided to sort of ship off and start Indico.
So Indico actually was born in the Olin dorms.
It was, in fact, for the entire first year. In fact, my co-founder's junior year, Indico existed primarily in my co-founder's dorm room from the hours of 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. on Sundays, and that was about it. And
so what in the world gave you the courage at age 21 to start a business?
That's an excellent question. So I had worked on a couple of ventures in the past. I had worked on projects with people from, HBS and Babson, and I sort of looked around, and this thing that I was so terrified about didn't seem so scary once I was really embroiled in it, once the people that were really making these startups were all around me. And me and my co-founder realized that we really liked working together, and we had kind of played with the idea of maybe we should make a company. And neither of us really knew what that meant at the time, but about halfway through one of our summers, we just decided, okay, look, it's enough talking about this. Let's put our money where our mouth is. So we said if we can make $1,000 in the next 2 weeks, which we primarily ended up doing through contracting, then we would make a company. So we hit the goal, and we said, okay, great, now we've made $1,000. There's market demand here, and we can make something that's production quality that people are happy with. Now we've got to make a company. And sort of tripping and falling after that, eventually we made our way to today.
So you guys are engineers, and the consulting advice you gave was in the area of machine learning?
Exactly. Yeah. So then it was a lot more sort of fully featured. We didn't have the luxury to just specify that we were only doing the machine learning portion. So we were doing sort of full apps for a couple of people, but now we have specialized much more on machine learning.
But was it difficult because you guys did not have any business background, or did you find your way to navigate that?
There were a host of difficulties that sort of came in at different points. I would say during the consulting, it wasn't very difficult due to the lack of business background. It was mostly difficult because we were young and it was very difficult to get people to take us seriously. So we would often get the question, where's your PhD, especially with something as technical as machine learning. So I would pull a lot of tricks. Like I would not talk about education at all, and I would make sure to always take the first meeting through a phone call so they couldn't actually see my face.
That's good advice.
Oh, no, that works extremely well. I realized early on that I sound much older through the phone than I do if I'm actually talking to someone.
And did you lower your voice a couple of octaves?
Absolutely, I did. I had people think I was in my 40s, which actually was excellent. That was the only way we got our first contracts.
All right.
The lack of business expertise started biting us a little bit further down the road.
So what were some of the other early hurdles?
One that people don't usually give enough credit to is the actual incorporation of the business. So it's really easy in hindsight, but at the time, because that is really the first step you're making forward to being a legitimate business, is incorporating. Is saying, hey, look, we're going to put a small amount of money. I think it takes about $1,000 to actually form this business as a legal entity that has assets, and then forming the bank account after that. Number one, never use Harvard Business Services. Legally speaking, it is actually very simple to form a company. They somehow have managed to mess it up. So we actually ended up having to pay about $10,000 fixing their mistakes later down the road when we took official financing.
So you hired a lawyer?
Yes, eventually we did. In the early days, the law work was done by me and my father.
Is your father a lawyer?
Yes, my father is actually a lawyer. He's a copyright lawyer, but my stepmother also is a corporate law specialist. So between the two of them, we got some backing, but really the majority of it was done by me. I'm shocked to this day that I didn't mess anything up. But there are a lot of online services now that will give you like, oh, here's an NDA because you need an NDA, right? Here's a seed series stock certificate because you need one of those. There's enough pre-built online, and you read through it and make a couple of edits. You usually won't mess anything up too badly.
All right, so you got through the incorporation one way or the other.
Yes,
through hell or high water. What were some of the other challenges?
So immediately after incorporation, getting some amount of money. So we had a little bit from just the contracting and consulting that we had done previously. So that gave us a couple $1,000s, but it really wasn't anything to push forward. So we said, okay, like what's the next step that we have to take? And evolving from a consulting operation was actually really, really hard. It's really attractive when you're starting out to say, we're just going to be a services industry. And if you want to do that, that's fine. But I would say our first biggest challenge was learning to say no to people who were knocking on our door and saying like, hey, we want to give you $1 million to do this thing for us. Because A, it turns out most of those people are not actually going to pay you, and B, your effort is much better spent on turning it into a sustainable operation. So getting a small amount of seed funding is important. Consulting can help with that, but basically having enough money to say when someone shows up with $1 million contract, to say, no, actually, I'm going to work on this, and being able to sustain yourself while you do that.
So what kind of conversations did you and Alex have up front when you were thinking about starting the business in terms of...
Honestly, shockingly few. Yeah. Fewer than I wish we had had in hindsight.
So what conversations do you wish you'd had?
The conversations that I wish we had had, that we ended up getting towards is what our priorities were. Things about, hey, so for instance, when we were starting out, there were some financial troubles, and we ended up getting an acquisition offer fairly early on, and that was something that we really had to work through, saying like, hey, look, this is a lot of money for us and our 21-year-old selves. Are we going to take this or not? So having those kinds of conversations, like, hey, if we get an acquisition offer, are we going to take it, right? What is the company that we want to build? How far along is this product going to go? What is the end goal for both of us out of this? Really high-level chats like that, just thinking, because we ended up getting really lucky in that we were synced on those. But if you end up 6 months down the road when you just closed your seed financing that you want to IPO and your co-founder really just wants to park this into an acquisition, that's something that you can't resolve at that point. And at that point, it may often kill the company.
How about dividing the pie and issuing equity?
50-50.
And how about other employees that you brought in along the way? How do you parse your way through that? So
that's a kind of complicated space as well. So in our situation, it was slightly different because it was really just the two of us for a full year and a half before we brought on other people. So that made it a lot easier to sort of split the equity. Be generous with equity when you're starting out, but still think it's valuable, if that makes sense. It's the best kind of line that we could sort of straddle is saying, as we bring people on, we do have to make sure that we give them good equity grants because they are early employees, but we weren't giving away 10% to, someone who joined a year and a half after the fact. That's just, you have to actually hold your own equity in high regard, because if you don't think your company is worth something, if you don't think that equity has real value, how can you convince anyone else that it has value?
So did you get outside advice on that? Were there metrics that you followed, or did you just go with your gut?
Little column A, little column B. There's probably 100 frameworks out there for how exactly you do equity grants. But at the end of the day, your goal is to give enough of an equity grant that your employees are incentivized to actually contribute to the vision and feel like they have real skin in the game. So that's your number one goal, is making sure that they actually care about how your company is going to do. And the second important goal is making sure that they feel valuable. Is that you want to make sure with each and every one of your early employees, because they make or break your company. I mean, so to give you a sense of how true that is, I mean, 2 of our early employees ended up being co-founders after the fact. We just decided that they were adding so much value and we were still so early at that point that they deserved the co-founder title. So we actually have 4 co-founders now. But make them feel valuable. If you're not hiring the absolute best people you can find and incentivizing them with both a real salary and serious equity and the ability to work with you, if not all 3 of those things are in line, then your company's not set up for success.
So Slater, you're talking to a classroom of students who may well be would-be entrepreneurs. What is the single most important advice that you could give to them based on your experience?
Do it.
Is this Nike?
Something like that. So the single biggest piece of advice that you have to recognize is that the only limiting factor in creating your business is yourself. You have the ability to go out and accomplish an astonishing amount if you actually put your mind to it. And starting is really the scariest thing. Once you start, other things will kind of start flowing, and you'll recognize all the things that you have to do. And granted, that's kind of a trial by error approach to it. But the old days of business where you put together a 100-page business plan before going out and seeking funding are done. Things just happen far too quickly. If you spend all your time thinking and coming up with a rock-solid business plan, by the time you finish it, the industry will have moved on.
So you got to move fast.
You have to move fast, and you have to realize that the biggest obstacle in your way is yourself.
Do you ever have dark days?
Absolutely. We had days where we had term sheets pulled from us and found ourselves awash in, a sea of no funding and, payroll coming up next Tuesday. There was a point when we were actually doing our friends and family round. Our friends and family round, by the way, went terribly. Our friends and family weren't even willing to give us money because they didn't understand what we were doing until significantly later. So I remember sort of calling up one of my relatives and saying, hey, look, you said you were going to invest. I don't want to push you, but we just screwed up with AWS and accidentally lost $2,000, and that means that we won't be able to make payroll next Tuesday. Is there any way I could, push you to make your investment earlier since you are already going to invest? That was a dark day, and they had to understand, hey, look, I am going to make this work for you. This is really just a one-time thing. There's more money coming in. This would just get us the 2 weeks that we need. There are multiple times when we've come within single days of getting payroll. Those are dark days.
All right, just last question. So Slater, you're now 23.
Yes.
And we're now in your office on South Street in Boston. And when I walked in, there's a whole bunch of people working here.
Yep.
What have you learned about being a leader, particularly at the age of 23?
So, being a leader is a lot harder than people actually recognize. One thing that I never imagined in all my life would become a useful skill was the fact that I did a lot of theater growing up. You have to, on those days when you know that payroll is not going to happen next week, you have to be able to go to your team and say, everything's okay, I'm going to take care of it. Not even let them know that there's a big fire, and make sure to keep the boat going. A lot of it is acting. A lot of it is being able to show your best face when everything is falling apart, and a lot of it is having the ability to execute on that. The second that you have people relying on you for their livelihood, for their source of income, that's not a relationship that you can take lightly. And if I had to tell myself one thing going into this, it would be to not underestimate that. There is no more intimate relationship than you literally putting food on someone else's table. And that's what being a leader is in this particular situation. Respect it and be an actor and keep people on the right track. It's really difficult, but it's one of the most important things that you can learn to do.
Well, on that note, Slater, thank you for your thoughts,
Happy
and we wish you all the best.
Thank you. It's still black. There we go.